Welcome back to Work on a Superyacht and to a big problem with life on board a superyacht, which is that you are not going to get enough sleep. And this isn't a rant or a moan. I believe that this is actually quite a big problem. I think the more we talk about it, the more chance that we have of resolving it, and that will make it a better industry, and it'll make it better for crew and for owners and for charter guests. So, what do I mean by not enough sleep? Well, the problem we have is that on a lot of yachts, not all, I will say that, not all, but on a lot of yachts, when the yacht is operational, i.e. doing what it was designed to do, there aren't actually enough crew on board to provide the high level of service that owners and charter guests should reasonably be able to expect. And that basically means that the crew that are on board get run into the ground working more hours than they should in order to try and provide the service that they should be providing. How do I know this? Well, I only have to look at my hours of rest and the hours of rest of my colleagues from seasons that I've worked in the past. What are hours of rest? Well, when you work at sea, not just on yachts, but as a seafarer in general, you are required by law to record your hours of rest. So this isn't something that I've just dreamt up as an issue. It's well known that if you're not sufficiently rested, it can impair your ability to work safely. And so you must record your hours of rest. The regulations state that in any 24-hour period, you should get a minimum of 10 hours rest, and in any 7-day period, you should get a minimum of 77 hours rests. So if we're looking on a weekly basis, that averages out to at least 11 hours of rest per day. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, what's the problem with that? I only need 8 hours sleep, maybe only 7. That gives me 3 or 4 hours either side of that to do as I please. Then back to work, no problem at all. But actually, there is an issue with that. Problem being that 10 or 11 hours of rest is probably going to be separated into 2 different sections of rest. By law, it can't be separated into any more than 2. And one of those periods of rest is probably going to be about 6 or 7 hours. So you're already sort of breaking it down into smaller sections. On top of that, you're not going home, getting some distance from your work, spending some time with friends and family, sort of being in your own space, making your own food, sleeping in your own bed. No, remember that you're still at work. You're still at work on a ship that's working around you. It's still possibly quite noisy. Again, you just don't get that distance. Maybe something's happened during your previous shift and you just need some space from that, but you can't get that space. And obviously that affects your ability to rest properly. So that's as a rest, and a quick look at some of the problems involved even when you're getting the amount required by the regulations. But what happens when you're not even getting that? Well, take a look at this old timesheet of mine. I'm not going to say which yacht this was from or when. At this point, it doesn't matter. All you need to know is that it does show how on some yachts, and I'm going to say that again, some, not all, but on some yachts, when the guests step on board and you're required to be providing that top level of service, the idea of getting your hours of rest just completely falls to pieces. There might be some objections to this. Some people might be saying, well, what's the problem? You're young, you're in your 20s, maybe. When I was a young'un, I could do it. Just sort of chin up, get on with it. Don't worry, I did that, and many of my colleagues have done that and continue to do that. We tell ourselves that it's only for the summer, we're being well paid, just grin and bear it, get on with it, get through it, and everything will be okay. And for the most part, it is. The problem is that doesn't actually change the physiology of the human body. The science on this is well documented. If you don't get enough rest, it impairs your ability, it impairs your judgment, and first and foremost, it means that you're not working as safely as you would otherwise be. Of course, the other thing it does is interfere with your mood and your temperament. I've watched young, energetic, enthusiastic individuals just crumble before my eyes under the stress and the pressure, simply because they're not well rested. I felt it myself. And ultimately, who does this impact? It impacts the guests. And, maybe you've got charter guests on board. They're paying 200, 300, 400,000 euros per week to charter this yacht. Why should they not have a well-rested crew who are energetic and ready to go? Everyone's going to do the best that they can, of course. It doesn't mean that the crew's just going to be a grumpy mess, but if they're just sort of pushing through and making the most of it, when actually behind the scenes they're really struggling, that's not going to be the best experience for the guest. And we must also remember that the yachting industry isn't like it once was. It's not just a load of 20-somethings doing it for a few summers just to build up a bit of cash. Of course, some people do like that in between a few ski seasons, but it's moved on from there. It's grown up since then. It's become more professional, and it now looks for and wants professionals with experience who are prepared to stick with it, who are prepared to do the training, do the courses, do the exams, to move up the ranks. But if this is the life, a lot of people aren't going to stick with it. And we see this. A lot of people join and they don't stick with it. And this is one of the big reasons. And don't be fooled into thinking that as you move up the ranks into those higher positions, that this gets any easier. In fact, quite the opposite. It gets harder because, at least in my experience, the hardest part of operating in those more senior roles is managing people, managing the crew. In fact, that's probably the hardest part of any industry, working as a manager. And what's more difficult than managing people? Well, managing a group of people who are exhausted, who are grumpy, who are having to live and work in the same small space 24/7, all of whom are missing their friends and family, and none of whom actually want to be there. When you're managing a group of people like that, well, your job just got 10 times harder. So, how do we make this better for everybody so that people do stick around, so that you do retain that experience, so people don't just think, well, I'll just try and blast this out for a few years and then get out? What about making it sustainable? How do we solve that problem? Well, I would say that it starts on board with the crew. First and foremost, making sure that everybody is recording their hours of rest properly. Make sure you record your hours of rest as they are. And if you've ever got someone above you saying, hey, make sure that your hours of rest are in order, even if you're going over your hours of rest, make sure that you just record them as if they were okay. Don't do that. I know that might be difficult, but don't do that, because if you don't record them properly, then nobody can see that there's a problem. And in the event that there is an accident, the first thing that anyone's going to do is look to see if the hours of rest were in order. And if you've said that they were when actually they weren't, no one will have any idea that your tiredness could have been a contributing factor to whatever accident has taken place. And the next thing that I think that we can do as crew on board is to not somehow glamorize this ability to work 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 hours a day after day, week after week. Sometimes within the industry, people are sort of saying, oh, I can do it, so you can do it. And it's sort of worn as this badge of honor. Let's not do that. It's not cool and it's not trendy. It's actually damaging your health and in turn your safety on board, and it's also potentially going to damage the health and safety of your fellow crewmates and possibly the ship and its guests. So let's move away from that as well. Let's recognize that it's a problem, and then maybe we can do something about it. Next, I think that a lot of responsibility falls on yacht designers, yacht brokers, management companies to ensure that they're educating owners on how the yacht actually needs to be set up and crewed in order to be safe and to be able to provide the standards that those crew really want to be providing. This is a service industry. The people who work in it want to provide a good service. Don't get me wrong, this is not all doom and gloom. As I said at the beginning of the video, it's not all yachts. There are Some yachts out there with owners who are very experienced, they know very well the issues when crew aren't looked after, when they're not given enough rest, they don't last, they move on. They know the issues with this, and so they make sure that their yachts are crewed adequately. And of course, this has got to be done on a case-by-case basis. Not every yacht is the same. They are obviously different sizes, but they are also used in different ways. This probably isn't going to be an issue for a private yacht that's only used for 2 or 3 weeks in the summer. It's just not used enough, and then outside of that time it's stern to in a port or maybe out of the water in a shipyard, and then the crew are getting their hours of rest, more than, they're probably only working 8 until 5, they've got their weekends off, they've got plenty of time to rest. So it's not all bad. There are some yachts who manage this very effectively, and we've also got to consider the much bigger yachts who tend to do quite well as well. Sort of 70 metres plus, they've just got more crew on board, so they're able to handle the demands of lots of guests on board, possible tender runs during the night. But I think the yachts that struggle the most are probably sort of between 25 metres and 70 metres in length. They don't quite have enough crew on board, and maybe they're being used a lot more often. Maybe they're dual season, and maybe during those seasons they've sort of got like 7, 8, 9, 10 weeks worth of trips booked, and so they need to keep going day after day, week after week, and that's when not getting enough rest really has its problems, because this compounds. You can do it for 2 or 3 days, no problem, but after you get into the day 4, day 5, day 6, day 15, day 20, day 30, maybe the yacht's at anchor for all of this time, or at least not going into port. People can't step off, people can't get away. This is when it gets really tough, and this is when the issue that I'm raising here is apparent, and I think it is a real issue. Sometimes you'll hear yacht crew complain about it, and you might just think that they're whinging, but I genuinely think that there is a fundamental issue with how the system's set up in terms of the numbers of crew on board, and also the holiday that's offered to those crew. And so that's the problem, which I just wanted to put out there. Sort of last week's video and now this, it sounds like I'm sort of pointing out all of the bad things of yachting suddenly, and that's actually not what I'm trying to do. I guess now I feel more comfortable to talk about some of the drawbacks. Still a great industry, still lots of opportunity. I'm not working on yachts anymore, but if I can still contribute something, if I can still help to make it better for you, maybe as you're working on yachts or as you're preparing to work on yachts, just making you aware of some of the potential issues, then that's all to the good. If you've dealt with any of these issues, or if you're concerned about any of these issues, please do leave some comments. I'd love to hear your stories. And speaking of comments, the comments from last week's video, overwhelming. I mean, amazing community. Thank you so much. I still haven't got any news for you on my next steps, but for now I'm just enjoying reflecting on my time in the industry, and just going through and drawing up some topics of some other videos that I guess I thought I would make last year, but I never did. So I'll make them now, I'll post them here. As always, if you found some value in this video, a like would be fantastic, a sub would be amazing, and I very much look forward to seeing you next time.